Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Chum Bucket Supreme and Single Cell Anniversary. Well, alright then. Looks like we've got two Plankton episodes on the menu. It's about damn time. I feel like we've hardly seen much of him in this season at all. This should be exciting for all the Plankton fans in the chat. Wait, this isn't a stream, that's the wrong expression. Oh well. As always, I gotta say a big thank you to everyone watching today, and now let's just get right into it. I can't believe it. Chum Bucket Supreme, dare I say that this is a season 6 episode that actually has some fresh character interactions? It's a miracle! Yeah, write that down now. I'll definitely be talking about this little trend in the upcoming season 6 overview. But back to what I was saying at the beginning, Chum Bucket Supreme gives us a character pair that we haven't really seen before, which is Plankton and Patrick. Like, yes, we've seen a bit of this in Bucket, Sweet Bucket, and Krabby Road, but SpongeBob acted as a mediator in both of those episodes. Here, though, we actually see these two interact for an extended period with just each other. This is great. And since I started this off by talking about interactions, I guess I can keep on that note and say that I love the interaction we get between Karen and Plankton at the beginning of this episode. I will never cease to be amused by Karen constantly roasting Plankton. Never. And I mean that. It's just so funny to me. I love the way that Plankton pretends to eat the chum in his sales pitch to the two fish. That was really funny. I also loved the visual gag with Plankton's anger here, with him exploding and that being used for a cup of, I guess, hot water. All of this makes for a pretty great start to Chum Bucket Supreme, and it's always nice to have a smooth slide into an episode. Another thing I like about Chum Bucket Supreme is that it utilizes a kind of plot that I really like, which is what I always call the Krusty Krab business practice plot, except this time it's being slightly altered to fit Plankton. To me, there's usually two kinds of plots that Plankton episodes fall into, especially during this general era of the show. One of these is what I've termed the Plankton plot, which is the prototypical trying to steal the secret formula type of episode. The other is what this episode is, which is, perhaps predictably, the Chum Bucket business practice plot. Another example of this kind of plot was Spongicus, in case you were wondering what kind of episodes fall under this label. None of this is really that important for any of y'all to know, but I like sharing the ways that I categorize this show in my head. It's fun. Anyway, to try and steer this tangent back to being relevant, what I like about these Chum Bucket business practice plots is that it's just very amusing to see the ways that Plankton tries to drum up business and get customers, because that usually leads to a fun episode. For Chum Bucket Supreme, it seems that Plankton's going the advertisement route to get customers. Should be lots of fun. And so far it is. Plankton's first attempt at an advertising campaign is laughably bad. Chum is metabolic fuel. How catchy. Though I gotta be honest with y'all, this would work on me. Okay, I'm kidding. But I mean, I do appreciate a humble bluntness. And then I love this moment from a characterization standpoint because I love how this is a consistent trait of Plankton's, being so completely out of touch with the way that people typically speak and think. We saw this in Plankton's army, and it's nice to see the return of that specific part of his characterization here. However, I do have one question. Do little kids know what metabolic fuel means? How deep does this joke go for them? Does it just seem like big words? As you can see, I don't interact with little kids on a regular basis, and I can't remember what I thought when I was a little kid watching this episode. Moving on, when Patrick enters the episode and the bulk of the plot with him, things continue to be pretty funny. I really liked the bit with the inside of Patrick's brain. I mean, first off, it's funny, and it also calls to mind the excellent joke with the inside of SpongeBob's brain from Squilliam Returns. And then, like I said at the beginning of this review, I'm a huge fan of Chum Bucket Supreme having Patrick and Plankton interact in a meaningful capacity because their characters bounce off of each other quite well. Patrick is a sharp contrast to Plankton, but in a way that differs from SpongeBob, which makes their interactions stand apart. SpongeBob is a foil to Plankton's scheming and nefariousness. Patrick is a foil to Plankton's brains. I also love that in this episode, Patrick basically instructs Plankton in friendship. It was funny, as well as a great use of Patrick's haughtiness, another trait of his that helps make Patrick and Plankton's interactions differ from SpongeBob and Plankton's. And SpongeBob not being a part of this gives Patrick room to be more than just his assigned role in the SpongeBob-Patrick insert character here dynamic of just a complete fool. Patrick ends up being Plankton's advertising muse, coming up with the utterly perfect slogan of Chum is Fum. I love how consistent it is with the show's humor and typical events that Bikini Bottomites just love this slogan, even though it tells you absolutely nothing. Huh. Is this supposed to be a commentary on advertising in general and how it, especially slogans, don't tell you jack shit about what's being sold, but instead just sound nice and appealing? I mean, I think it is a commentary on this, on some level, but more in a we're inspired by and are parodying this rather than making an actual statement on it. But still, if I do enough mental gymnastics, surely I can add this to my SpongeBob is anti-capitalist argument that is only 50% serious. Alrighty, switching my focus on over to the Krusty Krab for now, I gotta say that I love this entire scene. Treating absurdity with the utmost seriousness is a formula that almost never lets me down, and this is no exception. Mr. Krabs is alerted to an actual presence of customers at the Chum Bucket, and so he instructs SpongeBob to set off the situation alert. I love how the Krusty Krab having these alerts is such a common gag, and I'd love to see a meta joke about that at some point. Anyway, this is legitimately one of my favorite sequences in the show, like the way the floorboards just carry Mr. Krabs to his office while SpongeBob has to do all this extra shit is so funny to me. It's so clearly spoofing spy movies and things of that nature. It makes me think of Spy Buddies, which is a great comparison for an episode to have considering how much I love that episode. Another thing that's great about this part of the episode is that it takes what Plankton's regular tried to do and makes it much, much better. Whereas in that episode, Mr. Krabs couldn't allow himself to let Plankton have one single customer, and that wasn't the point either. In this episode, Plankton at least presents an actual threat to Mr. Krabs' business, and so he's going after Plankton because of profits, not ego. Not that ego would be a bad thing, but as I explained when reviewing Plankton's regular, that episode did not execute that effectively enough to work. And all of this is to say that in this episode, it's much easier to root for Mr. Krabs, and SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs' attempt to get the formula is much more entertaining than what we saw in Plankton's regular. The part with Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob feels almost like a side note to this episode, as we return back to Plankton and Patrick is only able to write Chum is fum. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, am I right? This whole scene is funny and full of comedic timing, and then later the reveal that the slogan got changed to Fum is Chum is great. I've gotta say, the vibes that this episode is giving, a commentary on something, just keep growing stronger. But anyway, I think it's interesting that this episode is named after something that only appears in passing, the Chum Bucket Supreme, which is a menu item. I feel like it would have made more sense to just name this episode Chum is Fum, or some kind of advertising pun or reference, but that's neither here nor there. At last, we reach the ending of this episode. Patrick resigns because he's burnt out, and I liked the gag with that. I also liked Plankton's little line about Patrick being his entire advertising department. I don't know how to describe why I like it. It's just both funny, but also fleshes out Plankton's thought process, I guess, and the events surrounding the episode. I can't explain it. I just hope you can get my vibe. And then I thought that the final resolution for this episode was done well. Just some tight writing here. The microphone that ends up being the key has been set up for the last few minutes, and now it's what brings everything back to the status quo. Plankton causes his own hilarious downfall because of his arrogance that had been established at the very beginning with his awful attempt at advertising. Love it. And then the very ending of the episode with Patrick bringing his advertising genius to the Krusty Krab is simply great. I just get this feeling that Chum Bucket Supreme is an underrated episode. At the very least, it's one of those episodes that people don't talk about a lot outside of the one big joke of Chum is fum. You know, I remember that Nick.com had a game on its website based on this episode. Good times. Good times. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So, I feel like by definition, most good episodes in seasons 5 through 9 are underrated since people like to write all of these seasons off as pretty bad. I suppose there are some exceptions to this trend, such as Sandcastles in the Sand or Perfect Chemistry, which are both very lauded, but yeah, especially in season 6, as I've been saying, there's a lot of hidden gems. I really enjoyed watching Chum Bucket Supreme. It was something a little different with the interactions, and it was funny and interesting. A perfect fit for my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.2 out of 10. Coming up next is Single Cell Anniversary, which, if my introduction didn't clue you in, the title should reveal is another Plankton episode. I'm surprised that in a season where Plankton has not been heavily featured, 2 of the few episodes featuring him are sister episodes. Kinda interesting. But anyway, that's not the only thing that makes this episode stand out, because this episode is also about Plankton and Karen's relationship, which, at this point in the show, had not been explored all that much. And this episode almost gains a sitcom kind of feel because of its chosen focus. Let's discuss. The beginning of Single Cell Anniversary is deliciously dramatic with Plankton's woes about his stench of failure. Thankfully, one of the few senses that this show cannot influence is smell, because could you imagine if we actually had to smell some of the things in this show? Ew, I shudder at the thought. Anyway, Karen ain't having none of Plankton's stink, and so she gives Plankton a much needed cleaning. We then learn that Plankton is most definitely not dream husband material, as he's completely forgotten his and Karen's wedding anniversary. I mean, come on now, Plankton, shame on you. But Karen hasn't forgotten their wedding anniversary, and in fact, she's even gotten Plankton a present, the Krabby Patty secret formula. I like how Karen was able to, get the formula without breaking a sweat. Just goes to show how much more, competent she is than Plankton, or how little Squidward gives a shit about his job. Both explanations work. And in my opinion, Karen is being more than gracious in saying that Plankton can have the formula as long as he gets her a gift from the heart, because she could have easily just gotten rid of the formula right then and there, but instead she's giving Plankton a chance that I don't necessarily think he deserves. However, this episode is also kind of rehabilitating the Plankton and Karen relationship image from the abysmal depictions it's had so far, so I can see the logic in having Karen be more forgiving here. Moving on, I do love a good cut to another character finishing a random story, which we see with SpongeBob and Squidward here. And yes, that is a very specific trope that I just pointed out, thanks for asking. It's also nice to see SpongeBob and Squidward walking together, as it doesn't even seem like they're walking to or from work, so now I have questions about why Squidward's willingly hanging around SpongeBob, and then the joke about bitterness versus despair was fun. From here, the episode becomes much more focused on SpongeBob and Plankton's relationship, which I love to see. The love emergency part was great. I love how serious SpongeBob takes this situation. This whole bit also feels like the basis of what the second movie would do for its first half, or at least one of the foundations. I also love the way that Plankton talks about Karen too in this part, because you can tell that he actually loves her, and this is an element that has been missing in quite a few of their interactions in other episodes. Once SpongeBob recommends that Plankton serenade Karen, I gotta be so honest, my ears started to close on instinct. Listen, Choir Boys was just... I don't want to minimize the word traumatic by using it, but I'll just say that it was an experience I learned from. But then, I was shocked. There were no annoying noises. Even when Plankton is first starting to get the hang of singing, and it's meant to be bad in-universe, it's not actually irritating to me. Wow. Have they finally learned their lesson? No more annoying noises? Are we free? Okay, but to be serious for a second, I did enjoy this little bit. It was fun, and I love that we get a Sandy cameo out of it too. And then we finally reach the big moment, which is Plankton serenading Karen. This part is so wholesome and cute, I adore it. But before I even get into that, I just gotta say that I love how pleasing this is to listen to. Yes, I believe that Single Cell Anniversary has single-handedly reversed the distrust for singing in this show that I developed after Choir Boys, so congratulations to this episode for breaking that streak. The song itself is also just good in that its lyrics are nice and wholesome. I also enjoy the visuals here, and I love how SpongeBob and Patrick step in to help Plankton as well. So all in all, this is a very enjoyable and satisfying scene and makes me feel warm and happy. Just like Karen, who is successfully wooed by Plankton's song. And then the two saying I love you to each other is just so adorable and sweet. I love it. I really like how Single Cell Anniversary, in the course of these last few minutes, especially during the song, almost makes us forget that Plankton did all of this just so he could get his hands on the formula. And what I really love is that even though that this is Plankton's goal, I don't really get the feeling that this undermines any of what he did. As the episode had already established, he truly loves Karen, and that song did indeed come from his heart. It's just that he would not have expressed this if it weren't for the incentive of the formula. That's actually some very interesting and nuanced character writing packed into an 11-minute episode of a comedy cartoon. Love that. And once we get our attention focused back on the formula, SpongeBob realizes that this was Plankton's goal all along. And so for the last bit of the episode, we get some fun antics. And just the way that Tom Kenny delivers, I am so fired, is actually so amazing. Like, that's not a line or delivery of it that I ever expected to see out of SpongeBob, and in the way that in that way, at least, it's just perfect. And then I love how Plankton's serenading actually ends up being the thing that foils his plan, because Karen is just so happy that she ends up short-circuiting. This is probably the cutest way we've ever seen Plankton lose, that's for sure. And then the way that SpongeBob's like, yes, I'm saved, your wife exploded. It's just so fucking funny. See, now that's how you do awkward humor. The episode ends with poor Plankton being subjected to the emergency mother-in-law program, which is pretty funny, and I'd say probably deserved. I really like Single Cell Anniversary. It's an episode that sticks out, and it's wholesome and cute, and it's funny and enjoyable. These are all qualities that I love to see from an episode of this show, and as y'all can see, I've got nothing bad to say about this episode at all. Well, there is one thing, but I'm leaving that for the closing thoughts. So yeah, nothing actually bad to say about this episode, which is a relief because I love being positive. So all of this is why this episode is being put in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. Man, when was the last time we had two back-to-back amazing tier episodes like this? I think it's funny how much unites these two episodes. I mean, they're both Plankton-centric, and they also feature Plankton interacting with other characters in new and interesting ways. Like, first it's him with Patrick, and then it's him with SpongeBob in a much friendlier capacity, even if it turns antagonistic in the end. And this is exactly what we like to see. Or at least, it's what I like to see. Speaking of Plankton, I really should watch the new movie, shouldn't I? Man, I'm so behind on SpongeBob content. I'll get there eventually, y'all. Mental health is just a bitch. Anyway, I also hinted to this while reviewing Single Cell Anniversary, but I wanted to expand and say that I like to think of episodes like that as precursors to the second movie, though the groundwork has been laid ever since Fun. But, you know, I like to make baseless claims sometimes, so let me have my fun. Dang, I just ended 2 sentences with the word fun. Okay, and now 3. Alright, and then one last thing, which is that one thing I said I didn't like in, Single Cell Anniversary. I mean, if y'all have been watching me long enough, you could probably guess. There are elements of misogyny in this episode, unsurprisingly. Just like with most of the show, I'm choosing to ignore them. Karen is still not given any personality or motivation outside of Plankton. The whole emergency mother-in-law program just uses the trope of the harpy, which is misogynistic. We know these things, but I still enjoy this episode even as I acknowledge these misogynistic tropes, just like always. Alright, and that's about it from me. This review ended up being pretty lengthy, which is good. They've been on the shorter side lately. Next review is going to be pretty lengthy as well, because the episode in question is 5 times the length of a normal episode. Hoo boy. So let me prepare to review that behemoth and close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.